Let's move to our second speaker for today. And absolutely a legend. When I read the introduction, I was just absolutely shocked. It's like Richard Brooks, who is 25 years in our industry, who is running his company K International, who is currently the treasurer for the European Language Industry Association, and outside of the industry, active investor in several technologies and green startups. And I'm absolutely sure we're going to hear something really interesting and insightful. Richard, go.
Thank you. I also write my own introduction, so that's why it sounds so good. Right, let me share my screen. Let's have a look. Hopefully you can see it all. That's the tough act to follow as well. That was a great presentation. I couldn't think of an intelligent question, so I didn't ask one. But thanks for that, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you guys. It's an honor. What you're doing here is amazing. It's very good, and it's come out of the right place, and it's a good thing to do. Right, 10 minutes, okay?
Yes.
You can see my screen, right? I thought I'd start my timer, 10 minutes. So I would like to address what measures could we take right now. But I think, first of all, I'd like to ask the question about, well, where are we now? What's the situation? And therefore, what's the answer? So if we go back in time to October 2019, this is Geeta Gopinath. She works for the IMF. She said, well, she was concerned about the little things like Brexit and the China-USA trade deal and things like that was slowing the economy down. So the economy was slowing down anyway at the end of 2019. And she said, quite famously said, there's no room for policy mistakes, referring to Donald Trump's trade war and the problems we've got in the UK and I guess the EU with Brexit, things like that. And they downgraded the growth forecast to only 3.4%, which if we sit here now, we're thinking, wish we could grow at 3.4% next year. So that's the world economy, that's the GDP. This was released a couple of days ago. It's from the IMF's website. You can see all the red countries are going to grow at less than 3% next year, or predicted to grow at less than 3% next year. There's some, I've also got an eye on the UK. There's some fairly grim predictions coming out for the UK. They're talking about a drop of maybe 13% GDP this quarter, which is astronomically large. So if we ask the question about, have we been here before? What I've done on this graph, this is GDP, which stands for gross domestic product, which is the total amount of goods and services that a country produces. And it's worked out on a quarter by quarter basis. This is plotted the last 40 years. And I've made the blue line slightly larger. So this is the advanced economies, because I'd assume, it's a huge assumption, but I'd assume that predominantly our industry is based on advanced economies. So not perhaps African economies and places like that, more like Western European and Central Europe and America and Asia and so on. So we're looking at advanced economies on here. We can see the blue line over time has changed up and down. First of all, we go back to sort of 1982 as a Latin American sovereign debt crisis, started by the Brazilians where they couldn't pay their debt, and then it spread to most of South America and it crashed their economies and most of the world. Moving on, we had an early 90s recession. This is when I started work. It was very difficult to find a job, let alone build a career in the early 90s. We had the Gulf War. Oil went to over $100 a barrel. There was all sorts of problems in manufacturing. Lots of economies transitioned as well. The UK economy transitioned from a manufacturing-based economy to a service-based economy around this time. Caused a lot of trouble economically. Then we move on. Obviously, 9/11 was a huge shock to world economy. And then we had the great financial crisis, which you'll remember. If you've not seen the film The Big Short, then that can be your homework this weekend. Go and watch The Big Short. That will show you all about how that happened and the stories behind that and the problems that we didn't learn about. This period here has been funded, I would suggest, by historically low interest rates. So central banks set a thing called the interest rate, which is the price of money. So if you think about money has a value and a price, and you can buy money from tomorrow, bring it back to today, well, that will have a percentage cost to it. So this has been, we've had interest rates of virtually zero, climbing up to about here. This dip here was caused because central banks tried to put interest rates up. So the economy was very weak anyway. And then obviously we've got this COVID-19 predicted dip here. The IMF, which is the IMF, but fine, the IMF is predicting a huge drop in developed economies. So on average, okay, we talk about averages, but on average, we're going over 6, maybe 6.5%. Good news is they're still talking about this V-shaped recovery. So you'll hear economists talk about a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery. Well, it'll take longer, or God forbid, an L-shaped recovery. We could debate that if you wanted. I don't think it'll be this fast, but you get different economists who give you different opinions. So what is being done? This is Jay Powell. He's in charge of the Federal Reserve. They're the guys that are in charge of the money in America. They've lowered interest rates to zero. The ECB, the European central banks, lowered their interest rates to zero. The UK has. Japan did 30 years ago, and so on. So most central banks have lowered their interest rate, the cost of capital, to zero. And they do that because they can then start printing money. They can do this thing called quantitative easing, which is another word for printing money. They're currently printing over $100 billion a week, which is an astronomical amount of money. When you go back to 2008, they were doing $70 billion a month, which again was astronomical. It was hard to understand. Now it's over $100 billion a week. You can see the extent of what's happening. So I've listed them all out, read them at your leisure, but sort of two key things. EU's printing 3.2 trillion euros. And then down the bottom here, the US is printing $4.5 trillion on the first round. So these are enormous amounts of money. Japan as well. I think the Japan figure was something like 13% of GDP, which they're creating out of thin air. So then there's a question of, well, how long will it last? Will we get this V-shaped recovery that's being predicted or not? I found this on Twitter yesterday, and I would suggest that we're here. Donald Trump was presenting last night about it's working. We're going to have a 3-step program to get the economy back to normal. The stock market's up today and everything's fine, right? So, well, I guess, roughly speaking, we've got 2 scenarios in front of us. One, we keep the measures in place and we flatten the curve. Second one, we all go back to work and it picks up again. I think if it goes back to work and our politicians stand in front of us and say 1,000 people died today, 2,000 people died today, that will become politically unacceptable. We'll probably all self-isolate anyway. So this scenario, I would suggest, is perhaps more damaging for the economy. So watch what the politicians are doing next couple of weeks. The UK has been locked down for another 3 weeks, starting yesterday. So we've got at least another 3 weeks of this. I'd suspect we've got another 3 months, but we'll see. So it's stiff drink time, guys. All right, it's going to get tough. What is going to happen is a financial crisis that's worse than 2008. So we need to prepare for that. Central banks are going to print money, which destroys your pension and any savings that you had. And we've not seen anything this bad. This is worse than World War II from an economic perspective. And I think we're going to have Japan-style stagnation for the next God knows how long. So if you want to read about how economies perform in this environment, you can read about the Japanese economy the last 30 years. And let's have a drink to that. Right, so what can we do about it? Right, fuck it, we're entrepreneurs, we're going to survive, right? So first of all, best piece of advice I've ever been given, and I will pass on to you, is to work out intimately and get to know it what will kill your business. Ultimately, it will be cash flow or lack of, but there'll be things that lead you to this lack of cash flow. This is a tool I use. Here, you can list the probability of a particular thing happening. Along the bottom, you can list the impact of a thing happening. So probability, can't blame a tax bill last month. Impact, well, enormous. And then we can plot it on our risk register. And obviously the red stuff here is what we focus on first. Don't waste your time down here. Think about what's likely to happen and the impact thereof. We need to communicate clearly to our teams. Our governments have been terrible. I know about everybody's government, but my government, the UK government, has been terrible at this topic. They have a press conference every day and they give us a load of bullshit about pretended science that you know, treat us like idiots. So we need to, as leaders, we need to communicate clearly to our teams and tell them in no uncertain terms what's happening. We need to be leaders. Also, I've seen in my team and spoken to a few of my colleagues in other companies, but we've seen that leaders have emerged from the team where perhaps we've sidestepped people before. But watch how your team performs, because this is a great crucible for developing leadership and developing people. So we may get some new management teams out of this, may get the next generation of us lot, you know. So watch your team, see how they develop. We talked earlier about managing your time. This is the Eisenhower matrix. It's a tool that you could use. If you list on here what's not important, what's important, what's urgent, what's not urgent, put the tasks on here somewhere. The stuff that's important and urgent, do it now. The rest you can bin it, really. But you know, if something's not important and not urgent, don't do it. Something's not important and urgent, get someone else to do it. Something's not urgent, schedule it. All right, that's fairly straightforward. What I've found is I can look at the times of day where I'm more productive. If it's quite an analytical task, I'm very productive at very early in the morning. I'm very good at writing things and being creative early in the morning, and I can make use of that. It's good at home. The kids are in bed till 9 o'clock, you know, so I can leave them in bed. I can come in my little garage and I can work while they're not here. So you may find that, you may not. Echoing what Joseph said here, it's important that you retain your key customers. You can go after chasing new things and new shiny objects, but I think what's going to keep us through this is the retention of key customers. I would make this statement that the ability to keep major customers makes a difference to your company's ability to survive a recession. This is a model we use in account management where we can list out that and it can help us to appreciate what are key customers and who are not. So if something's attractive to you and you have relative strength with that customer, then we can be in this box and they could be strategic. A little advert, I'm doing a 90-minute webinar for the wonderful Elia on the 29th of April. And if you want to come, send me an email. And look after your team. They're really stressed and they'll be scared and they'll be worried about things like losing their job. There's 16 million Americans out of work now. There's 2 million Brits out of work. I guess it's similar in each country. So Richard, jobs have just disappeared. Yes. We've got 1 minute, right? Or 1 minute, sorry. So look after your team. And I'm sure, I believe in the power of people, they'll look after you. Cash is king. Warren Buffett's quote, don't lose any money and then, you know, look at rule one. You need to understand how money works in your business. It's going to be difficult, but you need to understand that. If you don't know how that works, then find somebody who does. Your accountant is now your best friend. Some governments are helping. There's some great programs in the States to help governments. There's some average programs in the UK. I don't know about the other countries, but read the small print, okay, before you jump into bed with the government funding. Last but not least, I want you to look after yourself. I don't want you to feel guilty about spending time on yourself, yoga, meditation, playing the guitar, whatever you do to unwind. You're going to have to make some really shitty decisions next few months. You need to be in the right frame of mind to do that. And that comes from a place that you've given yourself time to think. With that, for God's sake, stay safe. I want to see you all soon for a beer, all right?